So, state your name,
Todd Vettel,
and then what branch of service were you in?
Marine Corps.
What dates of service did you do?
Active duty 2000 to 2004, and then inactive reserves from 2004 to 2008.
And then were you drafted or enlisted?
I was enlisted.
And then why did you join?
It just wanted the adventure. Yeah, it was just the adrenaline. I think the adventure, like we talked about before, I wasn't thinking about sacrifice to the country or patriotism at that time. That had not entered into my consciousness. It was thrill seeking, basically.
Yeah. And then why did you pick the service branch you joined?
Because they were on the extreme side of the military spectrum. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Both of my grandparents were in World War II, and my grandfather from Aurora, from this area, he was in the Air Force, the Army Air Corps, I think is what it was called. It wasn't the Air Force during World War II. And so I was around that a lot growing up, and I had this idea that being a fighter pilot was the coolest thing ever. At about 12 or 13 years old, I was on an eye doctor's appointment, and the doctor suggested that your vision is not adequate. He was in the Air Force, and he knew these things, so it ruined my day. And at that point, I switched gears to a different sort of thing, like the Army Rangers or the Marine Corps, and that's just what I was interested in. But I was fascinated with the idea of the military since a very young age, and I'm not sure where that seed was planted or how it was, but I just was.
And then how old were you when you enlisted?
18.
Yeah. Do you recall your first days in the service?
Yeah, it's what you've heard from others in the Marines. The yellow footprints when you get off at basic training, and it was in San Diego for me. Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, and it's just a blur of yelling and screaming and just trying to survive the mental tests and the obstacles that they place out in front of you. So I remember it, but I remember it being just a fascinating blur as well. It was just an intense time.
Tell me about your boot camp training experiences.
It's just a 13-week period of mental tests. The physical part of it is difficult for some, mostly for those that didn't do organized sports. If you did football and wrestling and basketball, if you had any youth sports behind you, you would get through the physical part of it. There were definitely some challenging things in boot camp, but most of it would be endurance related. Can you stay awake for 3 days and go on a long hike with a bunch of weight on your back? Stuff that you don't really do in football or wrestling, but those sports prepared you for the physical side of it. So it was the mental aspects of the Marine Corps basic training. They're constantly playing games. It's just a 3-month period of mental and psychological torture to break you down into really no identity, and then they'll build you back up with their conditioning or brainwashing into a Marine, and that's what they're sculpting and molding. But to get to that, they have to use psychological tricks and trauma to break you down. So that's pretty much the summary of what the Marine Corps boot camp does. They know exactly what they're doing. It's very well tested. There's all sorts of scholarly research behind the mechanisms they use to break recruits down.
Sounds rough. How did you get through it?
How did I get through it? There was no. It almost feels like I was on a survival level of consciousness, kind of like zombie mode. I was aware of things, but you're just reacting. It's just constantly reacting. You're up at 05, and then you're in the rack at, I don't know, it could be midnight or normally 2,200 hours or something like that to 10 o'clock. It's just no time really to think. So it felt like it just went by incredibly quickly, even though the days could be long. It just happened, and then you kind of process it after. I don't think I really processed it in the moment. So the answer is just surviving it.
I have a question.
Mm.
So yesterday I was sick. What happens if you were sick during boot camp?
You don't want to get sick because then you get set back. Like we started with 80 recruits in our platoon, and then at one time we had 40, some of us. So some recruits would get injured. They would sprain an ankle or break an arm on an obstacle course or something like that. That sets them back. They have to go to the medical platoon or whatever, where they just heal. They call them, like damaged goods. And then there are the physical conditioning platoons where if you can't keep up on the runs or you can't do enough pull-ups, you're not prepared for the next step in basic training. Go back and all they do is exercise until they can get into a better physical conditioning. And then if you're sick, you're going to the medical platoon. I think if you got something like, if I remember right, like the whooping cough came through, and you would just you pretty much just deal with it. They don't give anything other than ibuprofen. There's not a lot of medicine going around. It's just like have some water and suck it up and keep going. So you didn't want to get sick because it would make your boot camp go from 3 months to 4 months or 6 months, depending on what you had. I remember during the Crucible, which is the last field exercise before you're given the title of Marine, pneumonia was going through, and you're out in the field. There's no hygiene. It's just a tough environment. And there were some recruits that, because of the pneumonia, they were a week away from being done. They got set back because they had to recover from pneumonia. And there's even more recruits that had it and just bore through it and recovered after. So you just don't want to.
All right. What type of work did you perform while in service?
I was in helicopter-borne infantry. We call it helo-borne infantry. So we did. There's sort of like raid packages, ambushes. You could hover over a naval vessel and rappel and fast rope on top of it, on top of buildings. It was basically quick reaction to insert and then egress, ingress, sort of through helicopter. And I started out as a rifleman, which is the backbone of the Marine Corps, and then I did most of my time in a weapons platoon, still with helicopter-borne infantry, which is the mortars, machine guns, and assaultmen, which is like rocket launchers and explosives and things like that. So most of my time was in a weapons platoon.
Did you request that specific job?
I did. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do. When I was looking at basically I talked to the Army about the Army Rangers and the Marine Corps about the Marine Corps Infantry. I was going to do one or the other. The Marine Corps just has better propaganda and marketing, and it was an easy choice, and there was nothing else I wanted to do. I was very concerned that it had to be infantry. I think I was like, triple checking, like you got the infantry down, right, when you fill out the contract. So that's all I wanted to do.
Okay. Before entering the military, did you have any specialized skills or training that helped you get your job?
No, there's not really anything that you can do in the civilian sector. Like growing up hunting pheasant with your granddaddy shotgun is actually probably harmful. They don't like that. They want somebody with no weapons experience so they can train you the proper military way. So in terms of like semi-skilled labor, if you look at the infantry, or skilled craft, there's nothing really you do as far as the trade goes prior to that. Physically and mentally, you can have preparedness through, I think, the organized sports. Like wrestling, for me, wrestling was a very, just wrestling practice is tough, football practice is tough. Those sports made the physical part of it tolerable. I wouldn't say it was easy. It just was like, okay, I've done things as difficult as this. And then you get some mental toughness from those sports too. So if there's anything that I could say about preparedness, it would be detasseling, belling hay, working for a farmer, and football and wrestling. It definitely made it easier because you see people that didn't do anything and how it's challenging for them, and or maybe delayed their time in or graduation. So you just start observing different people with different backgrounds and talking and understanding that there are certain things you can do to get prepared, but you really, there's the mental psychological aspect of it. It's also different than those sports. So once you get there and you're in it and you start understanding what this cult is, you realize that, yeah, that helped a little bit, but it's something entirely different too. So I don't want to say that that made it especially easy. It just helped. It helped soften the blow a little bit.
Yeah. What did they teach you in the service?
It was kind of the University of Warfare. That's what we did in boot camp. There was a lot of history, Marine Corps knowledge. If you're in a classroom setting, it was you carried this book around. It was called Knowledge, and it was just a thick, like Bible-sized book of Marine Corps history and war. And so you learned that, and you learned honor, courage, commitment, the values, integrity was talked about a lot. They definitely are into character development. Um, Outside of that, it's once you get through basic training and you get specialized in the infantry, everybody in the infantry goes through rifleman school, which is the school of infantry. So you're learning all about a basic line company. That's your standard backbone of the Marine Corps, the warriors, the grunts, and so you're going to learn that. You're going to learn all the tactics, assaults, ambush, counter ambush, flanking, maneuvering, weapons handling, beyond what you do in boot camp from just rifle range stuff. So a lot of battle exercises, and then you get into the weapon systems, and there's different schools for mortars and for machine guns and for assaultmen. So you're just learning that, it's semi-skilled labor essentially, and your labor is that you are going to learn how to wage war, and that's what the experience was in terms of training.